This is Bill Pierce, and welcome to International Trade in an International Internet Business. This is a webinar that I've done a couple times over the last year and a half, and it's really focused on the different ways that people can either start a business to do exporting through the internet, or companies that are considering shifting from what they're doing today to an internet-based business. And I also typically have a lot of people that support these businesses also join that have different ideas about how to do things. So what I'm going to do first here is to kind of walk through Widener. Widener is here to help people. We are a free business support service through Widener University and through the Small Business Development Center Network in Pennsylvania. We're here to help businesses start, grow, and prosper. We even work on exits. I just had a client do an exit the other day. So we can help you in all phases of your business. Our consulting is at no cost. I said free. I'll probably say free a couple more times, but the current term is no cost. And it is confidential. So anything that we share in our sessions stays with us. We don't do academic work with your information, and we don't share your information with anybody. And then we provide educational programs like the program today, and there's a number of programs that you can find on pasbdc.org. Widener is funded by the Small Business Administration. That's our federal support, but we also get support from the state of Pennsylvania, from the Department of Community and Economic Development, Department of Environmental Protection. We actually have a department within Widener University SBDC that focuses on helping business owners with environmental issues. And we're also part of the PrEP network to help businesses in the region. And certainly, of course, Widener University is there to support us as they are today. What do we do? Again, we have the Small Business Development Center, which I'm part of. I both do local consulting as well as specializing in international trade. We have the PTAC, which is a group that helps with government procurement. We have a guy on the team who is probably, I would say, probably in the top 10 of people in the country that can help with how to connect your business with the government. Bruce Downing, he's excellent. And then we have a great group, as I said, environmental management support. We are a SBDC Next Gen Lab, which means that we have the ability to work through complex problems, do mapping, help with strategy, things like that. And we maintain certification for 2 centers of excellence, the health and life sciences. And that's the one I just talked about. We also have one for Latino businesses. Big group. I'm the handsome guy, 4th from the left, but we have a good group of people that support the network in a variety of different roles. Some have long experience, like Bruce, who I mentioned, who's probably 50 years in his topic. Joe Reyes is great with financial issues, tax issues, capital issues, and the rest of us all have our little specialties that we can help support. The other thing for today's presentation, I'm also going to be using some materials from a company called IBT. IBT is a partner for the International Trade Network, National International Trade Network for the Small Business Administration. They provide us a lot of help. They provide us access to some tools, some really good stuff, and they have some great slides. They've done some really good research work, but they are there to help people that are considering doing this or are currently importing, exporting, and just need help doing it better. So let me get started here on a topic, and then there's a poll I'm going to have James run for us. So why do people go to global trade, or it was international trade for a long time when I was doing it professionally? It was international trade, and it's now the global trade, and for good reason. There's more regionality in trade than there ever has been before. So when you read articles about Southeast Asia, those countries have gotten together and instead of doing business specifically with Thailand or Vietnam, you'll do business with the ASEAN. Same thing's true, obviously, with the Euro network in Europe. So a lot of it's become more regional, less borders. So it isn't country to country like international would imply. It really is a global effort. And as I go through it, you'll see how important that is for the internet-based businesses. So why do you want to do it? Okay, first off, more clients. The rest of the world is 20 times bigger than the United States. So there's a lot of business opportunity, and I'll talk about that more specifically in 2 more slides. But there's a great deal of growth outside the US in the internet and trading on the internet, whether it be B2C or B2B. New business opportunities. If your businesses are stagnant or stale and you're looking for new places to go, this, certainly trading, doing a global trade, but also doing it through the internet may be a great way to go about it. Right now, globally, we're faced with a really interesting time with economic diversification. Things are very strong here. But in Europe, they're still in recession. And there's countries in Europe as a result of COVID that will probably be in recession for at least 2 more years, like Italy. There's places in the world like India that are still recovering. China's, indicates that they're pretty robust, but there are, certainly problems with the economy there. So, if you're a global, then you can kind of address, when things are slow in the United States, you can go other places and sell your product. So a real benefit. You can use your capacity. Perhaps you have excess capacity, or you want to get more out of what you have already. Global trade is a great way to do that. Protect your domestic business. This is really important. People don't realize how much gets lost when people do not go outside the borders. And suddenly they find that they're actually competing against themselves with an offshore product that somebody has copied or replicated and brought back into the US market. And that's very common. Probably the biggest one in today's headlines is dynamic workforce. The young people want to be part of a global network. It's just in their genes. It's what they're going to want to do. And if you want to have a workforce, it's going to have to be diverse as well as dynamic, and it's going to have opportunities for people to work throughout the world, whether it be virtual or in real time. And the key takeaway here is that exporters outperform non-exporters in profitability over time, and you have a tremendous benefit here being a US company. So that being the case, James, you want to go ahead and run the poll?
Yeah, I don't think I'm logged in as a co-host. I don't think it'll let me run the poll.
All right, hold on. Let me see if I can fix that for us then. Okay, I made you the host.
Okay, there we go.
Not too many of us, but if you would take a few minutes and just felt this kind of helps me understand how to tone the rest of the presentation. Is that working, James?
Yeah, just waiting on one more. There it is.
Okay, so I can't. Okay, there you go. Okay, okay, there we go. Okay, so we have people that are currently importing, and we have people that are planning to import export. Perfect. All right, so that's a good group because it covers both the areas that I want to go through today. So terrific. All right, so moving on then. So I said that there was some important data that I think people need to understand. And this is really amazing, actually. When I was doing research for this presentation about a year ago, and I talked to a lot of people, and I've been on a lot of webinars about this, and it's just really an amazing statistic. But there's 32 million businesses in the United States, or companies in the United States. By the way, over 90% of those are small businesses by definition, but only 1% export. Okay, if you were to go to China, that number would be closer to 32% of export. If you go to Brazil, that number is somewhere between 18 and 25% export. So we are a very, very low exporting country. And that's because we have the largest economy in the world. And for the most part, businesses become satisfied with the domestic market. But as time goes on, I'm going to show you what's changing. You'll want to change that. On top of that, over 50% of the people who do export only export to Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean under a variety of fair trade agreements that the U.S. has with those areas. So the reason why you want to do that is that e-commerce really is starting to change things. Right now, about 12% of all global trade is being done through e-commerce, but that within let's say 10 years, that could grow to 22% and maybe even grow to 50% by 2035, which is one of the forecasts. So there's change here, and people are going to be doing this stuff. And as I said earlier in the last slide, recognize that if you don't want to do it, there is probably somebody elsewhere in the world who want to do it, and it's likely to be a $6 trillion market by 2023. More interesting information about this is 95% of the available e-commerce market is currently outside the United States, and that is shrinking. The U.S., was probably the first, in on e-commerce globally, but as time has gone on, it's become very saturated, and the growth isn't there. So the rest of the world is growing much faster, and at any point in time, up to 2.1 billion people are making internet purchases in 2021. So there's a lot going on in the space. There's a lot of customers available. And again, as the domestic market starts to shrink for the US, the global market is growing at a rate of about 12% in all channels, business to commerce, business to consumer, business to business, and peer to peer. And again, likely to double by 2030 and maybe be as high as 50% by 2035. And you can see this little graphic on the bottom shows that a lot of that is being driven by the internet, because the internet still isn't available to most of the world in places like Africa and Asia, a little bit in South America and Middle East. So there are places that just haven't really had the benefit of the internet and therefore haven't picked this up. But those places are not in the US. The US is, for the most part, saturated in terms of e-commerce, and the capability for e-commerce has been there for a long time. And as a result, the rest of the world is growing faster in this area than the US market will be. Just some interesting statistics. 94% of all B2B purchases are researched before they make contact with the company. So as you can tell, I'm a little bit older. I sold for about 35 years. And when I started selling, the funnel that people typically talk about would say that a typical sales guy would spend 70% of their time selling, about 20% of their time negotiating and closing, and 10% of their time in follow-up. In today's world, that's completely reversed. Most time is spent trying to get orders to close. A salesperson's primary role today is closing sales. Very little work is being done on prospecting. Certainly very little work is being done on client relations. It's very informal at this point, and probably about the same amount of time on follow-up. 50% of B2B search queries today are made on smartphones. So if you're considering this, I'll talk about that later, you will want to be smartphone capable, because people, laptops are going away. People are using their phones for more things. And I would say globally, as the internet emerges in some regions, there's an affordability issue where people will buy phones first and will buy computers later. And you want to be able to catch them, when they're on their own phones. The other one I really like here is 81% of the business to commerce purchases are researched before buying. And social media will replace web-based e-commerce in 5 years. So if you have a website, that's great, but recognize you're going to have to expand that into places like Instagram, WeChat in China, There's a lot of different of platforms that people are using, and there's these third generation e-commerce platforms that are rising that will replace some of the ones we're actually even using today. Etsy is starting to really eat up a lot of space, and that was well established with companies like eBay. Amazon continues to grow, obviously, but there's a lot of smaller ones that are starting to emerge, and they will be country specific, product specific, regional specific. Okay, so let's get into the global trade challenges a little bit. So one of the thing that people always talk about is, if I want to do global trade, do I understand the person on the other end of the phone? Do I understand the language, the culture, the customs? But also there's rules and regulations and taxes, okay, that have to be taken into account. And all those are different outside of what I would say the free trade treaties the United States has. So if you're doing business in Europe, if you're doing business in Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, the northern part of Africa, and some of the South American countries, you would have free trade agreements that kind of manage this stuff for you. But if you're doing business just about anywhere else, you're going to have to, these are things you're going to have to make sure you know how to do, and you're going to have to do them well. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But also things you're going to have to recognize is people buy in their local currency. You're not going to go into the Chinese market for sure and make people pay US dollars. They just simply won't do it. And there's probably a Chinese alternative that's available. Payments, making sure that you know how you're going to get paid. Credit card capability will be so important in what you're about to do here, because you certainly don't want to be chasing people down in other parts of the world. Having a delivery network and having the capability. Right now, my wife is a Chinese person, and she trades vintage costume jewelry back into China. And recently, she's been going to get deliveries made. And because of all this situation with the shipping that you hear about, and the lack of flights to different places and things like that, the cost of delivery has doubled for her. So where she was able to ship things for maybe $35 for a box, today there's $70, or even, I think she paid over $100 the other day to make the same delivery. So delivery costs are going up, and having relationships in making your deliveries and making sure your deliveries get to the client are very important. Product protection, it will be almost impossible to protect your product if you don't take advanced actions like packaging it properly, making sure that it's properly labeled, making sure that if it's a product that has a shelf life, that you address that. And returns and warranties. Typically things are not to be returned if they're shipped globally, unless you have some form of agent who'd be able to handle that for you. So these are all things that you have to take into account as you move forward here. But there's lots of help available. The U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is the lead organization in the federal government for international trade. But you also have the U.S. Commerce Service that's there to direct you in country-specific situations. The Census Service is there to record things. They do a lot of licensing work. And we at the Small Business Administration are also here to assist. And there is a huge push right now in the United States, based on the information I provided earlier, to make sure that people are looking at exporting, because in the long run, like I said, the U.S. market will become saturated. We do need to have small businesses creating jobs, and that's why the export market will become so important. And if you have the things that I have listed here on the left, the commitment, the product and service, you're going to have some cash flow, capability and capacity, and I'll talk about a plan at the end of our presentation today. You'll be on the right track towards being able to move your business forward in exporting and importing on the internet. So any questions, James, anything in the queue?
So far, no questions in the chat box.
Okay, so again, there's only a few of us, so if anybody does have question, feel free to speak up. I don't mind taking questions as I go through if there's something I say you'd like to learn more about. All right, so there's basically, and this is really what you came to hear about. There's basically 4 different channels to do global trade through e-commerce. Okay, this is what we call your digital real estate, and how much real estate you choose to take, whether it be all of any of them or parts of some of them. That really comes down to what's going to make you effective as you go forward. And I'm at the end, when we get into the plan and the strategy, I'll kind of show you how that can work. But I'm going to go through each one of these individually and kind of explain how they work. But in the end, what you'll find is that any combination can be put together, and there's probably infinite different platforms that you can use to address this situation. Okay. This is really important. Okay. We have to up something in the chat.
There we go.
Yes, by definition, Canada is considered a global trade. In fact, 60% of all global trade from the United States goes to Canada. It was the part of the statistic I showed earlier. They are a huge trading partner. They are our biggest trading partner. Mexico is second, followed by the Caribbean. So yes, Canada is global trade, and there are, in some cases, tariffs that have to be addressed. There are inspections, usually by the Canadian government, less so if you're importing. They seem to have a little bit more of a precautionary approach to stuff coming into the country than we do. But yes, it is global trade, and a lot of things I'm talking about today, you'll have to make sure that you can do well. Okay, so back to this is the language issue. So if you have a website today, okay, one of the things you have to say to yourself, is it worth trying to localize? I mean, localize in the country you want to do business with your website. It can be expensive and it can be challenging. And recognize that a very large market, okay, 1.4 billion people, 4 times the population of the United States can read and speak English. So you may not have to do anything to your website. You can be in English. You can have your examples in English. In some parts of the world, you have to be a little careful about culture. There are places in the world that that can become offended based on pictures and certain things. Middle East is very particular about showing people's faces. So you have to be a little cautious about that kind of stuff. But your current website could be very effective in a very substantial market, 1.4 billion people. You still have to make sure you recognize the geography you're going to, as I mentioned. Will your content be effective? All right, will people look at this and say, okay, this is something I want to buy? Is it culturally acceptable? I gave the example in the Middle East. They don't like to use people's faces in their promotion of products. There's a reason for that. Censorship. There's things that you can put on your website that wouldn't be viewed, or even your website wouldn't be viewed in some place in the world, including China. Payment options, as I said, people will want to pay in local currency. Very few people have what I would call global credit cards. So they have to pay through whatever media they have, and that may be a local bank in the local country. So you have to be able to figure out how you're going to address that. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to get paid in US dollars. In fact, I would highly recommend you do all your pricing and try to do all your transaction in US dollars. I think you just have to accept the fact that your market will become smaller as a result of that. And the other thing is Google. Make sure that if you have this type of website that's a US branded website, make sure that your Google issues are in good shape, that your SEO is good, and that Google is getting you out into the other parts of the world. A lot of people assume that the internet is global. It's not. You have to actually do things to get your message out globally. And there's things you can do. I'm not going to get into those today, but those things that we can connect you with people that can help you with this, that can help you make that. IBT that I mentioned before, they have the capabilities of doing a lot of stuff. But this would be your easiest way to go global, is to use your existing website and figure out how to reach out beyond US borders into other regions where people can speak and read English. It's sub-optimized, but it's still a very large market and may work out quite well, especially if export import is a bolt-on to a strong domestic business. There's always things that people are going to be looking for when you do this. Consumer preferences, you really have to make sure your technical standards are met. For example, my son, I used to live in Shanghai for a long time, and my son came to visit me one time, and he was able to sneak his Xbox into the country. And we brought it home, and it was standard, computer set up. It, clearly said 50, 60 hertz on the back of the game. We're 60 hertz power here in the US. They're 50 hertz power in China. Anyway, so he plugged in the Xbox, and the next thing we saw was smoke. But it wasn't the Xbox that smoked. Turns out that at one point something had gotten damaged on the power cord, and his mother had replaced it with a 60 hertz only power cord, and the power supply was what actually smoked. So we had to go to the store, and we had to buy a 50, 60 hertz power supply, and his Xbox worked fine from there. But again, there's just things like that you have to be aware of. The technical standards are different. I worked in an industry where we dealt a lot with pressure vessels, tanks, and high pressure piping, things like that. And there's 5 or 6 different standards you have to meet throughout the world to be able to use certain products in certain situations with pressure vessels. So your commercial and technical standards have to be met. Though there will be offshore requirements and restrictions, just like we have duties to import things in the US. People have tariffs and duties to import into their countries. Labeling your country of origin, very important. There are situations where things can come off ships and inspections be done, and if things do not show the country of origin, they can be set aside, and you may not even know it. The delivery just never gets made. So country of origin is very, very important. You'll have to have instructions for use that can be used globally. This becomes more important because where people would have maybe customer service in the United States, if you're doing stuff offshore, you may not be able to do that. So how to use something and recognize that some people may be using your particular product for the first time, and they do need to know how to use it. And people do globally do use instructions much more than we do in the US. We're kind of viewed as arrogant in terms of our consideration of instructions, but they're very important globally. Again, delivery considerations, I'm not going to go through that again, but certainly packaging, shelf life, and safety. Your product, again, may get caught in inspection if it's not properly labeled, if shelf life isn't established, if it's not viewed as safe going into the country. It could sit on a dock and never be delivered, and there's not much you can do about that. You're just kind of stuck. So you have to make a decision on whether you standardize your product or whether you adapt it for the market you're looking at. And one of the ways to go about that is do market research, and we at the SBDC have a variety of different ways that we can assist with market research in specific markets. And I'll talk a little bit more about what you can do also through the U.S. Commerce Service. I talked about Google before and Google Analytics. Here's a good example that I always like to show. But Google actually can localize SEO in 192 locales. So as I said before, you could promote your website. You could leave your website the way it is in English with no changes, and you could work on your SEO to be able to have Google get you into 192 locales. Now, we say locales because there may be regions, there may be subgroups within certain countries. India is that way. The south of India and the north of India and the center of India they're not the same. They have different language, different customs. And so therefore you'd have different groups of people in these locales. But if you run a search, your product may come up both in Michigan as well as in London, but the order may be different. Pictures may be lacking. There's just different things you have to make sure you're aware of. So you can localize your SEO, which means that your website's being directed properly, but you really have to work on things like keywords and different things to make sure that people are actually going to find you. And again, Google is good for that. It's just going to be work that it's going to have to be done, and potentially even have to be paid for, to be honest with you, to do it well. Okay. Localizing your brand. This is a shot from a internet cafe in Saigon. Recognize that most people in the world do not have laptops. They may have phones, and I said that that's growing, and that's a capability you're going to have to create. But a lot of people go to these internet cafes and they do their work using shared computers. That still exists today. So you have to make sure that whatever you're putting out there, people can find, and I already said find, but also that they can use effectively on whatever media they're operating from. If you do choose to expand your language, recognize that you don't want to do a translation on Google and put that on your website. That may actually be unappealing, may turn some people off. If you're going to do language, probably makes sense to either go to one of the schools around here that do language translation and get assistance, or even buy some services. But don't try and do it on Google and think that you're doing a good job, because you can actually insult people if the language isn't handled properly. Cultural appeal. All right. Making sure you understand the social media tools. All right. If you want to use Facebook Market, nobody in China is going to find you because Facebook's not available in China. If you want to work in China, you're going to use something like WeChat, or you're going to use something like Taobao. But what, some other service that's not what we use in the US, because they don't get used here. Again, I talked about payment, and I talked about distribution economics. Okay, so you can localize your website. You just got to make sure that you do it well. It's going to cost you some money. You're not going to do this on the cheap. And again, I definitely don't recommend just going in and Google Translate, try and translate things, because you can really create a problem for yourself. But you want to make sure you look consistent with the local market as you're going through doing it. And here's some, these are ideas that I would suggest that you consider. But again, the cost to do this is more expensive than simply using your existing website and reaching out to the English-speaking audience in the world. Some considerations: your domain name may not be registered everywhere in the world, and it could be redundant. This is something that a lot of people don't understand, that when you register domain names, in some cases, those domain names are only registered in the United States of America. They are not registered Canada. They're not registered China. They're not registered in Brazil. They're not registered in France. So you may actually have a domain name that doesn't work globally, and you have to look into that. You have to make sure that your navigation works in a multilingual manner, that your menus and everything like that will still operate properly. I can't emphasize mobile and enabled. There's a picture I used to have in here I took out. But if you go to a place like the Philippines, everybody is doing everything they can on their phones. There is no laptop-based market, certainly no desktop-based market. It was just skipped over. It was a generational change that just never happened there. Design adaptation. We talked a little bit about making sure your product works in the country you're going to go into. Cultural aspects taken into consideration. I mentioned before about not using faces on promotion in the Middle East. It's undesirable. But I would also say that things like clouds and blue are very highly effective there. That's what people like. Um, Optimizing your host site. You may want to buy a host site access in the local country. That's what people do, and that makes their search engines work better. You may have to do something like that. Make sure make sure that your content management system works, that people actually can see the pictures, that the speed is not, or internet speed, which may not be Wi-Fi, it may be cellular, will allow them to download and see the pictures, that the pictures, can be maximized, that all the, that everything can be done the way it needs to be done. And then finally, regulatory requirements, making sure you meet those. You need to start out with a finely tuned website or social media. So if you have those today, a lot of these steps can be taken to make what you have today effective. But almost all these things are going to have to be done to be able to be truly local in a specific market. Okay. One of the ways to do this, and this is just a terrific program, one of the benefits of us living in Pennsylvania, is there is a program through the U.S. Commerce Service called the Gap Analysis Program, where they will connect you with experts who can go through your website and explain to you how to localize your website, what enhancements to make sure that it's going to work properly. They can actually proof it in the country you're looking at, and continue and provide you referrals for people that can help your business do better. So there's a great program. It's a small fee. I believe for most small businesses, it's like $250. It's not that expensive. But you will have some expense coming out of it because they're going to make recommendations of things that you're going to want to do. And the way to address that is there is a program called GAP in Pennsylvania. So two different GAPs. One's GAP in your website, the other one, or GAP in your international website, and the other one's GAP Global Access Program, where Pennsylvania will actually provide up to $5,000 of funding to do website enhancement to improve your ability to do export work. So it's really a cool combination of the federal government providing the capability and the state being willing to support state-owned businesses or state residing businesses to get the work done. So this is something we could work with you if you have that interest in localizing your website. Language is an important thing, and I talked about this before. There's the top 5 website languages are English, Spanish, German, Arabic, and Chinese. English is obvious. I said that before. About 1.4 million people do speak English, so it is a good language, and the internet was created in the US, so it makes sense that it would be English would be number 1. Spanish is number 2 because the emergence of the Spanish population throughout North America, as well as Spain, of course. German because of technology. Arabic and Chinese are because of the characters. You're not going to see, although there's a lot of Chinese people, you're not going to see Chinese become the number 1 language simply because it's character based, and most of us would never be able to use it effectively. So English is and probably will be for a long time the top language, but the issue is how to use it. And again, a good example here that in Spanish-speaking Mexico and Spanish-speaking Spain, that the word for automobile is completely different. So it's not just understanding the language, it's understanding what's needed locally. And I think this is a really good point that people sometimes miss, on top of the things, like what cultural customs and things like that are, is you have to make sure that you're speaking the right language, and you're speaking it properly in the places you're going to be doing business. Okay, so the third element that I'm going to go through, and I think we have questions after this, is the e-commerce market. So as I said before, e-commerce is growing to the point that it will replace traditional websites in commercial businesses, e-commerce going forward. Um, Companies like Amazon have, about 25 different localized presence throughout the world. They're very strategic. They've put themselves in places that are growing. They put themselves in places that people like yourselves would want to market. Walmart has done very similar. But companies like Alibaba out of China, we hear a lot about Alibaba, but they are the largest e-commerce company in the world, and they are in, I believe, 98 countries throughout the world. It is Chinese, but they do have the ability to do everything in English. JD.com is one of these second tier or third tier that I mentioned. That's also Chinese, but they're doing a great job of catching up. Rakuten is a Japanese company. Mercado Libre is a Brazilian country. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this depending on where you're going. But these are the people that are the experts, and a lot of money is being spent by these companies to be able to make this work, because they want to be able to basically they want to be able to control this whole segment of e-commerce because it's so large. So they have tremendous capabilities, and again, a good avenue to go down. You can do all three channels: business to consumer, business to business, or peer to peer. These are globally experienced people. As I said, Amazon's done a really good job by being in 20, I think it's 25 now, different locations. They really can provide a local presence in most of the world. And it's a little bit expensive. You got to pay, you got to pay a fee for service, and you got to pay a fee on each transaction, but it may be cheaper than having to redo your whole website and manage international transactions, because they can handle payments, they can handle exchanges, they can handle distribution, they can handle everything, and kind of take it out of your need, and they would do it pretty well. So that's just I'm not a big advocate of Amazon for a number of reasons, but in terms of international trade, I think the model they use is very good. Distribution and logistics, and after sale warranty and service, which you probably can't do yourself. So again, all these capabilities you can do. Someone else, fundamentally, someone else does all the work, but you're going to pay. Right now, to have a page one on an Alibaba website in a localized area is going to cost you about $25,000. It's very valuable. And people actually trade those. There's actually a market for those. People actually buy them and trade them based on need, or rent them, lease them out to people. So it's a really great avenue, and one certainly worth looking into, because the trend is away from websites, fixed websites, and into this arena. For now, it's going to cost you some money, but it may be something to get set up sooner than later. The last one is third-party resellers, and these are people that are in the country that you're going to go to, and they may have all the capabilities. They may already have a local language website. They may have the ability to handle payments, pay you in US dollars. They may be able to receive and warehouse. They may be able to distribute. They may be able to handle warranties, and they have existing clients. So these would be referred to as distributors or agents or independent sales representatives. But the whole idea is they're within the individual countries. And I always like this picture, Jeff Bezos. This is Amazon, I believe 1993. And I'm sure at that point in time, this thing's starting to grow, and he's wondering, should he find a reseller? Because it is an avenue that makes it a lot easier. All you do is worry about your business strategy, and somebody else is doing a lot of the work for you. Not free, but maybe the easiest way to go about it, especially if you have a product that has a need for warranty and service, or a product that has a short shelf life that somebody else can take ownership of and make sure it gets distributed properly. Those are really good reasons to use a third-party reseller. And before I go to the questions, here's a good service that's available again through the U.S. Commerce Service called the Gold Key Program. And this service specifically helps people connect in other parts of the world, and again, not necessarily countries, maybe regions, through the consulates and U.S. consulates, and they actually have already vetted companies that you could work with. And for basically $1,000, I think that's the low end of the spectrum for this. They can connect you with 5 potentials that you can meet with and understand a little bit more about what's going on. The only requirement is an export company has to be 51% U.S. content. So you couldn't bring a Brazilian product into the U.S. and then resend it out. You have to make sure that it has 51% U.S. content, but they can help you find people to do these third-party reselling. And a very effective tool. I've been involved in a couple of these now, and the results were quite good. So again, another connection we can help you make in your journey for import and export. Real quick, we talked about most of this stuff, but even if you're not actually doing the transaction work, still having the capability of doing your marketing online, your customs paperwork now all is done online. Your banking, especially if you're going to a local market, you're going to want to make sure you're doing business with a bank that can do business, locally, that can do the conversion of local currency, US dollars, online. Most distribution logistics companies now are online. So there's a lot of online stuff that you're going to have to be able to do. The federal government, on the other hand, as you can see here on the right, still use a lot of paper, but that's changing. So as the world changes, you're going to see more and more uses for the internet for a variety of different tasks, not just buying and selling and operating your business. So questions at this point?
There aren't any in the chat box.
Okay, any questions from the group? So we had a few people join us. Okay, all right. Is there any questions? Oh, there's a chat one. Okay. Oh, hey, hey, Felipa. Okay, go ahead. If you have a question, go ahead. All right. All right. If you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure we get to them. All right. So, all right. So moving forward, then you're going to need a plan. Okay. People can do this. People are doing this all the time, and I'm going to say, moving forward, people are going to have to do this more. Now, whether you specifically have to do it or not, that's a decision. It's a strategic business decision you need to make. I'm just here to tell you that the market is going to become very large outside the United States, and you're going to want to be able to take your product to other places as time goes on, and the internet is making that easier every single day. But to do all this, you're going to need a plan, and I want to talk a little bit about how to do some planning here, because I think it's important. I'm not going to go through all these, but there is an excellent tool on the U.S. Commerce Service website called www.trade.gov that allows you to ask yourself some important questions. And like the second question here, is an export license needed? Okay, I've had clients contact me about certain products, and they have opportunities to sell offshore, and they contact and say, okay, what do I got to do to be able to do this? And the first question we have to look into is, do they have to be licensed to do that? In a lot of cases, they do. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. Many cases they do, and that's just something they weren't aware of. So we have to go back and we have to get the license, and then we can move forward. What's going to be your strategy? Are you going to, use your existing website? You're going to localize your website. Are you going to use third parties? Are you going to stay in the e-commerce domain? What's the time frame to implement your plan? That's so important. Is, if you want to be, if you want to be selling in global markets by Christmas this year, we probably have to have a little bit of a conversation, because you're probably not going to get there this year, but you could certainly be there next year. And how much money can you afford to spend to do this? And what's the cost benefit trade-off to the larger market relative to the cost to serve? All right, we have a question. You have a question, James?
Yes, we have one in the chat box. How do you deal with copyright, etc., or at this point cannot protect, and it is all about sales competition?
Excellent question. So there's two sides to this question. I'm glad somebody asked it. I have it in here a little bit later. But so there are things you can do to copyright and patent what you're offering. The first step in that is to do that in the US. Now, there international thievery, or I'm sorry, intellectual property thievery exists everywhere in the world, including the US. So, but first you're going to have to get somebody in the US patent office or trademark office to tell you that what you have is unique. If you can't do that here, then you can't do it anywhere else in the world. I have had clients contact me and say, look, I have a product. I know it's original in this country because I know people there and so on and so forth. I want to patent my product there. You can't do that. You actually have to do it in the US first, and then you can patent it elsewhere. So if it's not patentable in the US, it actually isn't patentable anywhere else. So your starting point will always be to apply for a provisional, or if it's really a unique product, a non-provisional patent, and we can help you with both of those, to get your product registered and the date documented as to when you said your product was novel. And somebody in the patent office, at least initially, agrees with you and issues what's called a provisional patent. And you can then move that to a non-provisional, and a non-provisional patent means they go and actually do the research. Just so you know, that takes a couple of years, but then they come back and say, yes, what you have is unique and nobody else in the United States can take that. And then you have to go about getting your patents elsewhere. And there are systems to do that. It's not as onerous as it may sound. The real problem is the opposite. In many places in the world, copying is not really viewed as a negative thing. The purpose of commerce is for people to be able to make money, and people have to take care of their families, and they'll look for ways to make money. They're not being disingenuous, because in their eyes, all they're really doing is making what you've already made maybe better or available to more people or at a lower cost. And as a result, ideas get stolen all the time. They get marketed in local markets. I used to have a slide in here that talked about McDonald's. McDonald's has been copied throughout the world. If you go to a McDonald's in China, and I know this from personal experience, first off, they don't even serve burgers at most of the McDonald's in China. They serve chicken. Not a cultural thing, by the way, but they don't want to get sued by McDonald's, so they serve chicken instead of serving hamburgers. But it's the same sign. The sign is exactly the same. I have another example that in Iran, which is a country we hear really despises the United States, that there's a fellow called selling McDonald's hamburgers with the same golden arches in Tehran. So copying is not a surprising thing. And unless you're a very large company like Apple or Google, and you can really protect yourself, it's very hard to do. If there's a skill that goes with it that people are not going to be able to replicate, that's really helpful. If your product is designed such that people can't just replicate all the parts, or there's science behind it, or there's code inside of it that's unique, that all helps. But it's not going to probably be a legal path that's going to be able to protect you. It's unfortunate, but but it's a truth. But if you don't look at the export market and you're not looking at the global market, there are lots of examples of people's products being replicated elsewhere and then brought back in the US market and competing with them at probably a lower cost. So you really have to make sure that you do know what's going on if you have a product globally, and then you'll have to look at the right avenues to take to be able to protect that product from some intellectual property thievery. But it is a challenge. Was that helpful? Okay, let's move on here. All right, so I said I was going to show you a strategy, and this strat, like I said, the 4 blocks that I showed, the individual components for, using your existing website in English, localizing your website to a local market, using e-commerce platforms and third-party resellers are 4 distinct strategies, and I hope everybody understands that. But you can do a little bit of each, and here's an illustration of that. So maybe a company opens up in the US, they have a US website, okay, and that website can be easily applied in Canada because most people in Canada, not all, but most people in Canada do speak English. So it's easy to use that website. SEO crosses the border, and that's why I talk about this not being international, it's global. So the SEO is the same in Canada as it is in the US. It's primarily in English. The rules are very similar. Power connection that I gave the illustration about before is the same in Canada as it is in the US. So you can market Canada and US and be doing international trade. And that is why most companies do their trade with Canada. It's so simple to do. But let's say you had somebody call you in France and say, hey, through a connection I have in Montreal, I understand you have this product, and would you be willing to sell it in France? So then what you could do is you could take your website, you could go to the US Commerce Service GAP program, say, I want to open my website up in France. They would assist you with how to design your website for France, the language, the culture, currency transactions, all the things that I've talked about. You could get SEO set up that's French oriented. Maybe there's French websites that make more sense than some of the American websites. You could have social media connections. So you can go through and do that and actually have the same business replicated locally in France. Okay. And again, that's how you would go about doing that. And let's say you're in France and somebody from Brazil goes to Paris one day and sees your product, and they contact you and says, hey, I'd like to be able to buy your product in Brazil. I think people would love your product in Brazil. Okay, so then you look at maybe the e-commerce website or e-commerce sites, and you go to Mercado Libre, okay, and you go to them and say, look, I want to put my product on your e-commerce site in Sao Paulo, all right, and so that you go to them, you pay them a fee, you probably also pay them a fee per sale, but you're now in Brazil, so now you're in 3 countries with one strategy, okay, and that's just to move your product. And now you're in Brazil, and a good friend of mine from Singapore just happens to travel to Brazil, and he sees your product and says, hey, I would like to sell your product in Singapore. All right. So then you cut an agreement with him as an agent or distributor. All you do is you either ship it to either through Mercado Libre, he can buy it, or through the French website or the US website, they can source it. You set up some sort of commerce relationship that he can sell that in Singapore, maybe an exclusive relationship. And now you've applied all 4 strategies. Now, I made that sound really simple, and I did it on purpose because I just don't want to discourage anybody, but it could actually be that easy, especially if your product is unique, you have some strong marketing capabilities, you have consideration for the different cultures you're going to be faced with, but you could apply all 4 strategies in different pieces through people that you're going to meet along the way. And that's how people, are able to create these effective connections. All right, James, we have a couple questions here.
No, there's just a question about the if there's going to be email, so I just
Yes.
responded.
Yes, yeah, you'll get a copy. That's a great question. You'll get a copy of the presentation and you'll get a copy of the video of the session. So if you want to go back and check me on anything I say, you'll get a chance to do that. Okay. The other point I just want to make sure I didn't miss here was the note here on the right side. Very important that your product and your brand remain consistent in this transaction. Perhaps the packaging will change. Again, whether it's the shelf life or safety or import requirements, whatever that may be, that can change. But once you start doing this, you want to stay with as common of a product as you possibly can, especially when people are identifying interest in that particular product. Okay. Gucci bags are a good example. Okay. Gucci sells the same handbag everywhere in the world. Now, how that's promoted is different. Okay. I've, there's Gucci stores all over the world, and, they don't promote them the same way they do here, but it's more localized, but the handbag itself is the same handbag. And maybe they package it differently. Maybe the way that it's sold is more culturally acceptable. But again, they're offering the same handbag throughout the entire world, regardless of the channel they're using. Apple's another good example. In a lot of the world, people don't understand this, but in a lot of world, Apple does not go to market directly. They actually have Apple certified resellers in a lot of the world. Philippines is a good example of that. In the Philippines, there is no Apple store. Okay. You go to what's called a certified Apple reseller that has a license to sell in the Philippines. Just as famous, by the way, as Apple. Everybody in the Philippines will know the name of that company, but it's specific to Apple. It is the same product as you're buying in the United States, but they use a channel because they cannot work effectively in the Philippines, and they can't. There's a lot of places they can't work effectively. That's an example. It's a place where there's a large population, but they just don't view themselves as being capable of marketing effectively there. So they use a third party who can. So again, all this whole strategy stuff and the 4 elements that I've talked about can be done in whole. It can be done in part. It can be as simple as having a U.S. website, marketing Canada. And there's support for you to be able to go different places and do different things. All right, I think we're wrapping up here. All right, last but not least, goals are very important, and going to be very important in your import plan. Make sure you know what you're trying to do. If you're trying to grow your brand, your goals are going to be different than if you're trying to improve your customer retention. Okay, I have a small business in insurance, and just so you know, regardless of how many commercials you see on TV, everything about insurance is retention. Everything about insurance is retention. The market's saturated. Almost everybody already has insurance. Clients are moving back and forth. In fact, with internet capabilities and companies like Progressive and place at Geico that really push the quick, speedy insurance signing. Retaining your clients is very, very important. So, in insurance, your strategy would be retention. If you have a new product or you're introducing a new product, it would be growing your brand. Creating engagements, creating shows, using Facebook for likes and things like that. And then also conversions, creating leads, all right? Making sure that not only do you have end customers, but you have influencers or advocates that can promote your product even separate from what you're working on yourself. Okay, so those are the kind of things that that you have to think about as you're looking at your different objectives and your different goals as you go through and do your plan. This is kind of the last takeaway before we get into some questions. But global trade via the internet is a tremendous business opportunity. All right. I've talked about some challenges. I've talked about some things you're going to do. It may sound like a lot of work, but in the long run, I do believe that for businesses to grow in the United States, you are going to have to be willing to do business on an international basis, whether that's importing or exporting. Although the government continues to support exporting because we want to create jobs. If we build things here and export them, we create jobs, and that's why the SBA is so active in this. But importing is just as important, and creating jobs and bringing products to the U.S. that aren't otherwise available can be a very, very good business. Okay, so it's a tremendous opportunity. The U.S. has a great name. Made in America is loved, regardless of what you may hear. I'm just telling you, it is loved throughout the world. People would much rather buy a American-made product than the same Chinese made product. That's absolutely true. But most owners are not pursuing the opportunity. And the question is, are you really to do this? To do it, you're going to have to make sure you're committed. You're going to have to know whether your product will stand up internationally. Is it unique enough? Is it packaged properly? Is it culturally acceptable? These are all things that we can work together on and figure out if that makes sense for you. You got to choose a channel. And I said you can choose one channel and do it really well, or you could do parts of all four channels, right? Depends really how you want to go about it. Make sure you find partners and advisors. And again, whether it be Bill Pierce at the SBDC or somebody else in the state at University of Pittsburgh has an excellent import-export center. Do a lot of webinars if you watch the state website. Really good people there, know what they're talking about. We do it at Weiner, of course. U.S. Commerce Service out of Philadelphia, World Trade Center out of Philadelphia. There's a lot of capabilities in the area to assist you as you go through and take a look at this. And again, e-channel may be a great way to do that. So you can contact one of the e-channel providers and they'll talk to you about what you have to do to be able to make your product unique and be able to sell on the market. But most importantly, you're going to have a plan. And it should be written. Okay, all plans, just I'm an old world guy, but even in today's world, whether it's on your phone or whether it's on a PowerPoint or whether it's handwritten on in a notebook, your plan should be written down. And I kind of went through some things that you really need to consider as you look at your plan. So that's kind of the story. I think we did pretty good on time, James. So here's my information. James, there was a survey. Were you able to run that? Okay, while James is doing that, are there any questions? And again, you can raise your hand. I think I have I think I gave everybody the capability to talk if they choose to. But what questions, ideas, thoughts do people have? Is anybody there? Did I lose everybody? James, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I think I only think one of the participants have their are connected to the audio.
Diego. Okay. Hey, Diego.
Hey, I guess I will try to do a personal session.
Okay, great.
And I can ask you for a couple of things and yeah.
All right, great. I would love to do that. That'd be terrific.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. We got an excellent from Lisi. All right. Any other questions, comments, things that would be good for the order? All right. Well, I'm going to call this a close. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. James, I hope you got everybody's name and everything. And
Yeah.
We'll be following back up with an email that will have the They'll have the presentation. It will have the video of what I spoke about. Some people prefer it that way. And also have some of the links that I talked about for the U.S. Commerce Service programs, as well as IBT online, as resources that you can reach out to. And if you have any questions, again, here's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me. All right, really good, everyone. Have a great day. Looks like the weather's got a little better, so have a good day and enjoy your springtime. Take care.
Thank you. You as well.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, there's a question.
Yeah, no, I know Apple. Hey, Apple, how you doing? Apple, are you on? I don't think your microphone is turned on. Yes, you should be able to. All right, you might have to type it, Apple. I don't know. It looks like your computer's not. I can't tell. Okay, so here's the message here. Okay. All right. Yeah, shipping costs. Shipping costs. I assume your question is, yes. So I think I gave that example. I don't know if you're on, but I know you've been on other sessions. You know, my wife does the vintage jewelry exporting, and she's actually seen the cost of shipping back to China triple. So where she was probably paying $35 for a box through a freight forwarder, less than container, just put the box on somebody else's container type thing. It was like $35. The other day, the bill was over 100. And that's because there's fewer ships. There's not as many flights, in particular to China. A lot of the flights have been restricted to China because of COVID. So yes, shipping costs are quite high. I was on a session last week, and I believe that situation is expected to turn around in the second half of the year for a couple reasons. One, because there likely is going to be less activity, so there should be more room on the ships, but also there'll be more flights released now that COVID seems to be subsiding in a lot of the world. So I would right now, yes, it's very high, highest it's probably been in a long time. It's taking a long time, especially if you do ship, but we expect it will come down over time. Okay, very good. Well, listen, James, thanks for your assistance today. Thanks everybody for joining us. And as I said, have a wonderful day.
Thank you as well.